Okay, I know what you're saying. What the heck happened? This is not what that truck looked like the last time you posted a video, Lou. And you're right, it's not. Here's the thing. I kind of got a little ahead of myself, and I didn't video any of this because of time. And you know what? Sometimes you just got to do things when you get the time to do them. And the time that I had wasn't real conducive to what I wanted to do. So you get to see the aftermath. What did I do? Well, sanded down and painted the grille a satin black. I added the red Titan letters. I blacked out all the badges on the truck, and I vinyl wrapped both the front and rear bumpers in a vivid matte black vinyl. All this I did over the last few weeks, but unfortunately I didn't video one single iota of it. Turned out pretty good, pretty happy with it. And yeah, still don't have new tires, still don't have new rims. Guess what? That's how the cookie crumbles. I've had to put my money elsewhere. I also added the grill light kit, which is actually not for this truck. It's actually for a Toyota Tacoma. But guess what? They pop in here pretty well and they stay put. Wired them up. I can control them from the cab with a factory switch if I don't want to use them. But they run off of the parking lights as their trigger. So I think they look pretty good, as indicated in the beginning video that you guys just watched. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about something that has been eating at me for the last few months. And if you've watched my other videos, and you might know what it is. And it was my epic fail. But guess what? That sure don't look like a fail to me. That's right. I overcame adversity. Translation. I actually got on the internet, I did my research, I figured out the wiring schematics, I ordered the right connectors, and some that really weren't designed for that. Put it all together, did some troubleshooting, and this is what we got. Everything works, so I retained everything that I wanted to. The Bluetooth microphone works, the center display works, it displays everything that the radio does, my backup camera works, my steering wheel controls work. And this thing sounds so much better than the factory one. Well, I guess it is a factory one. But it sounds so much better than the one that it came with. And I have navigation, so I was able to use that cool GPS antenna that I went to all that trouble of installing a couple months ago. So, super happy. Stay tuned. I'll explain, for the most part, what I did. Okay, guys, so here's what we end up with. This part right here that I'm touching is the actual factory harness, that 32-pin connector that goes into the back of the old radio. This is the axis harness, the female end of that harness. And then what we've done is we've changed over to a plug that fits the back of the new Bosch radio that we want to put in. And so what we've had to do is repin everything. So what you don't see is the end of the original axis cable. That is effectively the same as this male plug here, because this was designed just to pass the signals through so somebody could piggyback and install a rear view camera if they didn't have one. So I've repurposed the harness because it's got the right connectors and the right wires. Not the right wire colors. It's just got enough wires to do what we need to do. And then I had to figure out the pin out of the new connector that goes into the back of the Bosch radio. So I will detail in a minute what I did, but it was very simple. All I ended up doing was pulling the female pins out of this, or correction, out of the original axis harness. I'll show you what's left over of that. Sliding them out and then finding out where they go on the new connector, clipping them back into place. And now, because this connector comes empty, it doesn't have any female pinouts in it. So if we take a look here, at the factory connection, we can see that many of these pinouts are not used. And so I've detailed that out in a beautiful hand drawing. I must say it's one of my betters. But everything that you look at when you look at the drawing that I made is from the back of the male connector as such. So here at the top of it, you can see the tab that locks it into place when it's connected to something. and then everything is numbered from left to right across the top, left to right across the bottom. And these numbers correspond to the factory wiring schematics. So they don't make a lot of sense because you think it would just be 1 through 32 for a 32-pin connector, 1 through 24 for a 24-pin connector, but that's not the case. Each pin has its own designation to the factory, so you can trace it from start to finish. But this is it. This is what we end up connecting to. So what are all these wires? Well, some of them are for your rear view camera, some of them are for your heads-up display, or correction, your dash display on the gauge pod, your microphone connection, and a couple other miscellaneous things. If you look at this connector, you can see I have removed some of the pins. I haven't removed all of them because I got lazy and I didn't feel like trying to pull them out. But if you see that little square above each pin, if you shove a small gauge wire in there, what it does is there is a metal pin that crimps onto the wire. There's a little tab on that. When you slide something small through that square hole, it pushes the pin down and you pull the wire out of the back. Same thing for these male connectors. If you look, you will see a square. That's where you want to put in your small gauge wire, just to disengage that retention clip that's actually on there. And I can show you that in a minute. So here's what we're talking about. For the male pins, which would be the female connector, let's see if I can get that in focus. You kind of see that little tab right on the top, right there. That tab needs to point to wherever that square or that rectangular opening is. So on the female connection, when I put it back in, because I did have to change some of these, when I put it back in, that tab should be pointing towards the rectangular opening of whatever pin I'm trying to put in, because that's where it actually locks into place. For the female pins going into the male plug, I know that seems weird, very similar. Just has a little tab on the top, and again, that little tab on the top corresponds to whatever one of these pins, the square opening above that pin out. So, or I should say the rectangular opening. It's the small rectangular one, not the big rectangle, or the big square, because that big square is actually where the pin inserts from the connector end over here. The rectangular one is where you want to shove your wire. And I'll show you what that looks like. It really depends on what you're using. So for this connector here, it was a heck of a lot easier for me to use just a piece of small gauge wire and line it up and shove it in. And shove it in until you kind of feel it click, and then you can pull the wire out the back. And what this does is, since this connector comes unloaded, it's just a empty plastic connector with no female sockets in it for the pins. We can take them out of the old one, which is right here, and you can see this is the one that came with the Axis wiring harness. Same plug that comes into here. I figured out what wires I needed, and what I ended up doing was actually plugging this into the factory wiring harness that used to go into the back of the old radio, and then just following them all the way up, so I knew which wires I needed on the back of here. You can see there's some cut dead. There are some that I've removed, because one of the side effects of this is, since this harness was designed for a rear view camera that never existed in a previous truck, these two wires here didn't actually have a pin out. They were empty because they didn't get used. So I ended up having to take a couple of the wires I wasn't using out of both ends of this connector. One here, one here. I popped them both out using my small gauge wire, and I just put in a new wire. None of these wires correspond to the actual color of the factory harness. It makes no difference whatsoever. When Axis made this, they just used multiple different colors of wire, but it has nothing to do with the actual factory wiring colors. So I didn't stick with that any more than they did. I just used a wire from point A to point B, and if you look at the schematic I drew up of that pin out, it'll make sense. So pin number 32 of this connector, which is the one coming into the back of it, so we're actually talking about the factory connector that plugs into here and flows through. The back of that connector corresponds to a pin over here on the back of this connector, and I just played plug and play and made up my custom harness. It all works. I don't know 100% why, but it does. I just took my time, and this is my custom harness. Now, thing is, for this setup, we actually don't have the auxiliary input. So if you're one of those people that likes to plug in the auxiliary input from, I don't know, a cell phone or an iPod, if you still have one of those, it's not going to work. I did not change the pin out because there's a separate connector for that goes into the back of the radio, both of them, the old one and the new one. And guess what? Neither one of them actually do anything differently. It's just a different connector. So there's like an 8-pin connector for both radios, the old one and the new one, and they don't match up. So I'd have to go out and get the other connector that I need to splice in and make a new wiring harness for that, and I'm not going to do that because I don't use it. So nobody plugs anything in manual anymore. We either do Bluetooth or you do Apple CarPlay or Android Audio or something like that, but I don't use the hardwire connection anymore. So when all is said and done, the auxiliary input on this thing isn't going to function anymore, and I don't care because, again, I don't use it. And here's the back of our radio. So for reference, this bottom 24-pin connector is just the factory radio connection going out to the speakers and all that stuff. So that's pretty standard. That didn't have to change anything on this to get this to work with that radio. This is the one that we've modified with the new connector and then the Axis harness going back to the factory radio male coming out of the wiring harness from the truck. USB connection. The blue one is our new GPS antenna, which I installed in my previous video some time ago. I was actually wrong. Looks like that white connector there, that's the auxiliary input. Looks like that one actually does work on here. I'm surprised. I didn't think it was going to because it looked different, but it does, so I'll eat my words. That gray connector with the blue tape on it, that's your factory FM, AM antenna, and then that pink one is your Sirius XM antenna. Now, the one thing that is different on this radio is the connection for this. I mean, it's pretty standard, but Nissan, or I should say in this case Bosch, versus whoever made the other radio, the one that came with it, there's actually another ferrule that goes around this that's just solely designed to keep this connector in place. Yeah, it's got kind of a couple detents and a twist lock feature. I don't have that. I don't know if it's supposed to be on here or if this radio doesn't use it, or whoever I got this radio from took it off for whatever reason. But this connector, all we really need to connect is that center pin right there. And so we're good to go. It's just, I'm going to have to tape this to that little metal tab right there to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. So I'm going to get this all buttoned back up, and I'll be back in a minute. Success. So, XM works. Dash display works. Steering wheel controls works. And source, there's no CD. Auxiliary, AM, FM. Everything works. Turn that down. Check that out. I'm so proud of me. Alright guys, well, yeah, it took a long time. Oh yeah, by the way, nav works. So that GPS antenna I bought works. Sweet. Pretty happy, guys. This worked out. All told, I think I spent maybe 25, 30 bucks to make that wiring harness, including shipping. I'll detail all of that in a minute, as far as exactly what I used and where I ordered it from. And the end result is I have a functioning navigation radio in my truck, which I was pretty sure I was going to have to get rid of this thing. In fact, I even put it up for sale, but nobody bought it because I'm stupid and I just buy shit. But that is it. So what are you going to need to do this? Well, first and foremost, you need the 24-pin connector that goes into the back of that Bosch radio. Found that on Allied Electronics website. Now, here's the thing. You can look at it now and you can see it's $1.28, but it cost me 10 bucks to ship. So, all told about $12 to get that connector. But it is the TE Connectivity 1318917-1. What does that mean? Well, that's just the manufacturer's part number you need to reference when you go to the Allied Electronics website. And then the rest of those specifications that are on there, it really doesn't matter. What does matter is that is the exact connector that you need. And the other thing to keep in mind is that is an empty housing. So the housing just comes, big plastic piece, nothing else in it, and you pull all the pins, like I said before, from the access harness, which I'm about to show you in a minute. The next thing you need is from Access Electronics. It's the Access AX-NIS-ADDCAM1 NIS ADCAM 1 harness. $11.99 from Walmart.com is fine, but you can get it pretty much anywhere. That's what you want to reference though when you're looking for it. And what it does is it's designed to allow you to add a aftermarket backup camera to a radio that doesn't have one. But it's not exactly what you need. So if you look closely at it, you can see that it's got the right connectors. Well, what we specifically need is that female connector that we're going to plug into the factory wiring on our Nissan Titan. And if you look closely at it, one of the things that you can see is that RCA jack coming out of it. That is how they designed the connector to add that factory camera, or I should say into the factory camera that didn't exist. So when you look at it, you're going to have to change pins 36 and 35. Don't exist on that female connection of that harness. So you're going to have to reuse some of the ones that you're not going to use of those wires and pull the pins out and reinsert them into pins 36 and 35 so that they actually connect, because you will use them in the new setup when you connect it to that 24 pin connector. Seems complicated, but when you see it up close and personal, it'll make a lot more sense for you. But with that said, there's going to be a lot of pulling old wires out and reusing the pins on both ends and just repinning both sides of the connector. The easiest way to do it personally, if you have the time, just pull all of the wires out and put the ones back that you need, because you'll have more than enough. Like I said, that harness is designed to cover a broad spectrum of different options on Nissan Titans. Well, the Nissan Titan SV with a base model radio doesn't use all of those holes. So you'll have more than enough wires to repin it as you need to. So just pull them all out and then just follow what I'm about to show you, which is your pin changeout diagram, and you should be just fine. So here is your roadmap of sorts. Yeah, I know I said I had a hand-drawn diagram, but even I couldn't handle that. It was just too busy. So I went ahead and I made this one up. And it's basically references 3 connectors. So I'll go through them real quick. And I've labeled them as you would find them in a factory wiring diagram. They label everything by number and letter. Or I should say letter and number. So M171 is the one that we really don't have to touch too much. That's the one with all the speaker wires in it. Ignition power, illumination control is the only one we actually have to worry about that connector for. And the reason why is in the other 32-pin connector, which we'll call M175. That's the one that's actually does not fit the back of our new radio, but did fit the old one that we're actually modifying this harness to plug into the back of our new radio. The illumination control wire doesn't exist in there. In the factory wiring of, I guess, anything that uses that Bosch radio with the navigation with that 24-pin connector, which we're adapting it to, it does have that in there. So what we have to do is basically take pin number 8, and remember all of these are referenced from the back of the connector, the harness side of the connector where the wires actually go into that male connector. And from left to right they are numbered, and those are your reference points. So for this, when we're looking at the back of M171, that connector, pin number 8, if we count over across the top, is the 8th pin from the left. We just want to splice into the wire coming off the back of that. Don't want to take the pin out, we're just going to leave it in there. I suppose you could, but it's a lot easier just to take one of those extra wires that we've pulled out of that access harness and just cut the end off of the male pin end, the one that goes into that female connector, and just splice it in. I soldered one into, it's a gray wire, pin number 8 on that connector, and then we plug that in over to pin number 44 on our new 24-pin connector. So when you look at this, that's the only one you're going to touch there. Everything else comes off of that 32-pin connector and then into our new 24-pin connector. So what I did is I took that 32-pin connector and then the 32-pin female that I had in the new access harness, and I just plugged it together. And I turned it around and I looked to see where, for example, in this case, pin number 36 is, what wire that is, and I just followed it through, and I made sure that there was a wire coming out of that female side of the harness and then goes down and then plugs into my new 24-pin connector that I'm starting to pin out, like I told you guys to do before earlier in the video and showed you how to do, sort of. So for example, if you look at this diagram, if I look at pin number 36 on M175, that 32-pin connector, that goes to pin number 35 on M98, which is our new 24-pin connector that we bought off the internet. And it's labeled there. That's why it says from. So to pin number 35 on M98. And if we look down at M98, it'll give you a cross-reference and show you that pin number 35 is coming from pin number 36 on M175. I know that's a lot of numbers, but if you follow it, it'll actually make a lot of sense. Keep in mind, I know that it seems weird that not all the pin numbers line up, but that's just the way it is. That's just the way it's wired. There's not much we can do about that. So I hope this makes sense to you. Just keep in mind, the only one that we're actually just jumping from and splicing into on M171 is pin number 8, which will go over to pin number 44 on our new 24-pin connector, M98. And then the rest are all coming off of flowing through that female connector that's in our access harness, and then we're repinning to M98, our new 24-pin connector. Clear as mud? Great. Thank you and good night. Well, we just couldn't leave it there, could we? Absolutely not. Why not go out for a drive in our 2018 Nissan Titan? What better way to enjoy the fruits of our labors after working so hard than to take her for a test spin? Actually, I'm on my way to Lowe's to run some errands for my wife. But with that said, I got to tell you how happy I am. I know I've said it before with the way that this thing turned out, but I thought I was stuck with that brick of a radio from the factory for the rest of the time that I own that truck, which is probably admittedly going to be a pretty good long time because I can't afford to buy another one. But this couldn't have turned out any better, and I am super happy. So what is going to happen from here? I have no idea. One of the cool things is that I can add amplifiers and stuff like that if I want to down the line. Get a speaker level to line level converter. I'll be able to retain the factory speaker locations and wiring, but I'll also be able to potentially add some amplifiers, maybe even for a subwoofer. They make a really cool, tiny underseat subwoofer from a couple different companies, but I think we're going to take it easy right now because I'm not trying to draw too much attention to myself on the home front. But with that said, if you're willing to try it out, I recommend that you do so. But remember, this thing is not for the faint of heart. I already said it for once in my earlier part of this video. If you're not comfortable with doing wiring, if you're not comfortable with cutting into factory wiring and changing some things, well, then maybe this project isn't for you. But I think I'm too stupid to know any better, so this is just what I do. I tinker around and hopefully I figure stuff out. Anyway, guys, once again, thank you for watching. I can't thank you enough. I hope this helped you some. If you have any questions, please let me know. I will do my best, as always, to answer them as best I can, right? Without further ado, we will close this off with, again, recognition of the fruits of our labors before we hit copyright infringement. Yes, I just figured out adding the GPS gave me a compass on the dash, which I did not have before. Don't know where that came from, but guess what? It's there now. Happened to notice it when I was scrolling through. So I netted a compass. Not a bad deal. Bye.